Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for Roger's Random Book Show. Yes, Roger and I have wandered around the manor once again, picking up some random books. And now we're going to talk to you about these random books that I picked up that were just lying around the manor. But the first book is not so random. It's kind of something I have to address. A problem that I have to address with next month's Roger's Cheap Old Book Club pick, which I did not catch when Roger picked it. It's all Roger's fault. Roger, it's your fault again. So next month, Horror Mayhem, and this book is appropriate for Horror Mayhem, next month's pick for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club is this, which is Weird Tales, issue number 1, the very first issue ever of Weird Tales, which came out March 1923. This is a facsimile edition. And I've got a few Weird Tales facsimile editions. I don't have any original Weird Tales issues because they're, very old and expensive. And even if I bought them, I couldn't read them because they just disappear in my hands in a pile of pulp powder, probably. But I do have some facsimile editions. And this is the first issue. This is what I chose. Not me. This is what Roger chose for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club next month. But there's a problem that I discovered as I was perusing it. And that comes towards the end of the magazine, the book here. We have a strange novel in 2 parts. The Thing of a Thousand Shapes by Otis Adelbert Klein. So Otis A. Klein, wrote a story in here, but it's a serial. Part 1 is in this, but it doesn't have the end of the story. For the end of the story, you have to read issue number 2. So Roger picked this, but one of the stories is only half a story. So of course, now that I realize that is true, have to read the second issue, if only to get that second part of the story of Otis A. Klein's story. So, issue 1 and 2. So yeah, this is the second issue, which has a really kick-ass cover. And this one came out April 1923. And it's pretty cool. And has a lot of really cool, awesome old advertisements. What would you give to become a really good dancer? This is Weird Tales. Would you give your soul? Would you give your soul to be a good dancer? I wouldn't. I would rather just suck at dancing. We've got the Airy here, where they talk about the first issue of Weird Tales. I'll just read a little bit because it's cool. Here we are with the second issue of Weird Tales, and we're going strong. Or at least judging from the number of congratulatory letters that the postman drops on our desk every morning, we're making a lot of friends. But, says the boss, are we also making money? A fair question. As we remarked before, Weird Tales is an experiment. There has never been another magazine quite like this, hence nobody knows whether or not such a magazine will pay. And of course, if a magazine doesn't pay, it promptly ceases to exist. We do believe, though, that Weird Tales has entered upon a long and flourishing journey. We know there are multitudes of readers who like this kind of magazine and are willing to buy it. Are these readers numerous enough to support Weird Tales? The answer is up to you. But we'll never get anywhere unless we all work together. It's our job to publish the right sort of magazine. It's yours to buy it. If we both do these things as we should, why then of course Weird Tales is sure to succeed. Nothing can stop it. And nothing did stop it for years and years. Not the Depression, not the deaths of some of its greatest writers. It just kept on going into the 1950s. When it did die, the Undying magazine did die, but it did come back. And it, occasionally dies and resurfaces Weird Tales in one form or another. It really is the Undying magazine, really, or the Undead magazine. It's, up to you. But yeah, if you read this, I guess you kind of have to read this. Both of them are available for free, I believe, on Project Gutenberg. They're both in the public domain, so there you go. So that's the first thing I was talking about. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to first show up a book I have talked about before, but there's a reason I'm going to do that. So recently, I had the odd and unusual experience of talking to a couple who are readers. They're readers. This young couple I met, we started talking about books, and I think they're both in their mid-20s, somewhere around there. And they have a bunch of books. They're readers. They love to read. Mostly new fantasy and that kind of stuff. But they read, okay? They read. And I was talking about some of my favorite writers, and I mentioned this writer, Jack London. And I recently showed this book. This is the unabridged Jack London. I mentioned Jack London. And they both looked at each other and said, "Who?" I said, "Jack London." And they said, "Who? Who's that? Who's Jack London?" And I asked them, "Well, didn't you go to school?" You know, I tried not to be that rude, but I probably was just about that rude. I'm like, "Who did you read in school?" You know, I mean, they said Mark Twain. We read Mark Twain. We know who that is. They don't know anything about Mark Twain, but they know Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. They knew Melville because of Moby Dick. Didn't know Jack London. I did mention Call of the Wild, and the female half of this couple said, "Oh, the Disney movie." I walked away from this conversation a lot, Roger. I was very disturbed because is this the state of things? Is Jack London, I knew he wasn't relevant in today's society. I mean, I know that. People just don't read Jack London. But I figured that people at least knew who he was. You know, they had to go to school. They had to know who Jack London... No, apparently not. So is this commonplace? I ask you, faithful viewers, is this a normal thing that people don't know who Jack London is? And so this disturbed me so much that I decided, you know what, I got to start reading this guy and talking about him on my channel, because even though I don't have a ton of viewers compared to like big booktubers, I read, and most of my viewers, let's face it, are my age or older, and so they obviously know who Jack London is. But you never know. Some young person might accidentally watch this channel, you know, by accident, and maybe hear the name Jack London at some point and say, hey, maybe I'll read that guy. So I've got to start reading Jack London, which is why I brought this out, because this is the unabridged Jack London. This has a bunch of his original books in it. Most of the books in this volume are about the Yukon, and there are a couple about the sea. This has Tales of the Fish Patrol. This is an awesome volume, but it certainly doesn't have everything London. But there's a lot of Jack London in here, so I probably will actually start with this. But I've got some other Jack London worth mentioning. I have the Library of America, of course. This volume has a lot of the stuff I just held up. This has Call of the Wild, White Fang, The Sea Wolf, Klondike, and other stories. So I'll have to double check the contents, but I'm pretty sure everything here is in here. But this is the first volume of Jack London that Library of America did. The second volume they did is pretty interesting. So this is Novels and Social Writing, which is some of the Jack London you don't find in other places. The People of the Abyss, The Road, The Iron Heel, Martin Eden, and John Barleycorn. So this is some of the most interesting stuff that Jack London wrote. It has been years and years and years since I've read any of this stuff. I was probably in my 20s or younger. Back when I was in my 20s, everybody knew who Jack London was. Not now, apparently. So this is definitely a volume I'm going to be picking up once I'm done with the other one. And I also have a book that I thought about recently because it was mentioned in the Robert E. Howard biography I read recently, because this is one of Robert E. Howard's favorite books. London was one of Robert E. Howard's favorite writers. And that's this book. This is The Star Rover, This is actually the 100th anniversary edition of the Star Rover. It's just a paperback from Seawolf Press, which is a small press that put out a bunch of books about Jack London and has for quite some time. I think most of the stuff they do now I think it's print on demand now, their books. But they have a lot of Jack London. This is, I think, the only one that I have. Actually, that's not true. I probably have a couple more someplace else, but they're much older than this one. So The Star Rover, which is a story about a guy who was wrongfully convicted of murder, I believe. I think I haven't read this since I was like 24. But if I'm remembering right, it was a college professor who was wrongly convicted of murder, and at times he's put in a straitjacket and he's very mistreated from what I remember, and he escapes from his present predicament by re-experiencing his past lives. Like, he could remember his past lives. And that theme of reincarnation really struck Robert E. Howard. And he absolutely loved this book. And I remember it being really interesting. And I remember it being a pretty good book. But, I was 24, 25 years old. So I have to reread this because that was like more than half my life ago. And I do have this 100th anniversary edition lying around. So, time to get back to Jack London, obviously, and talk about Jack London. Another thing that's coming up for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club is The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. And I found this, I was looking for all of my physical copies of the books that I've got coming up for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. And this is my physical copy for this book, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. The first time I read this was in an old hardcover edition that my stepfather had, which I did not successfully steal from him like I did some other books. I had to buy my own copy, and I got this old copy from Dover. And it's a great Dover edition. So this is a wonderful book of Robin Hood. It's just wonderful. And it's full of these incredible illustrations. Let me see if I could find some of them. There's Sir Richard there. There's Robin Hood and the Sorrowful Knight. I mean, this whole book is full of these magnificent illustrations. Now, this book is available for free on Project Gutenberg. I'm almost certain that the illustrations are also available on the Project Gutenberg edition that you can get for free. For this, though, it's a really nice illustrated edition. I would probably get a physical copy. It's in the public domain, so you can get different editions. I like this paperback of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. This is probably my favorite version of this story, although it certainly is not the only version of the story available. Like, I got this one from Paul Creswick, illustrated by N.C. Wyeth, which is a different version of the Robin Hood story with different illustrations, which are also beautiful, from N.C. Wyeth. In fact, there's some of the most gorgeous illustrations. They're just absolutely beautiful. I don't think the book itself is as good, to my mind, as the Pyle version, but the illustrations are just so good that it makes the book worth picking up. And I might just, when I get around to reading Robin Hood for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, I might just read this one right afterwards. I mean, why not? I'll do a double feature of Robin Hood. I mean, this is great. So a couple Robin Hoods for you on Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Now let's talk about some annotated books. This is random. Both of these annotated books would be perfectly suitable for Horror Mayhem next month. And the first one, which I don't think I've talked about this yet, which is kind of a surprise because it's from Leslie S. Klinger. And this is the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the new annotated Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, edited with a foreword and notes by Leslie S. Klinger. There's an introduction by Joe Hill. So this, of course, is the very, very famous story by Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the story everybody knows. But this is a wonderful annotated edition, which is absolutely beautiful, with tons of illustrations, notes in the very wide margins here, and there are a ton of notes. So this is a very, very short book. Klinger has done a ton of annotated editions, including Sherlock Holmes. He's done H.P. Lovecraft. He's done probably my favorite edition of Dracula ever. And he's done Frankenstein. And this is his most recent annotated edition, I believe. I don't know that Klinger is going to be doing any more annotated editions. I think this might be the last one he does. I hope I'm wrong. But I haven't heard anything about any new editions that are annotated editions from Klinger. I would love it if he would do Tarzan. I think he would do a great annotated edition of Tarzan. There are other stories I wish that I could see him annotate. There are so many, actually. But I'm really glad he did this one. And it really, the annotations and the illustrations are just amazing. It's just packed full of illustrations. It's magnificent. And it really takes you back to the time when this story came out. Now think about this. Think about reading this story when it came out. Before you knew the plot of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now when we read this story, we know the plot. We know the ending. We know the secret to the story. And the secret is, and it was a secret, that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde were the same person. And that must have shocked the hell out of the readers of this book when they found out, because that would have been a tremendous surprise. It must have just been amazing. And it's one of those things that makes me realize why this was as popular as it is. Besides the fact that it's just a great story and all of the psychological reasons. But now when we read this, everybody, even if they've never read Stevenson before, even if they've never read this story, they know the surprise. They know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. I shouldn't say that after the whole Jack London thing. There could be that there's some 20-year-olds who don't actually know the plot of this story. Oh, God. But most of us know the plot of this story. And it just makes thinking about what it was like to read this the first time. Wow. That must have blown people's minds. Anyway, that's an awesome book. But as long as I'm pulling that out, I might as well pull out Edgar Allan Poe. Because I did a video about all of the things I might read for Horror Mayhem. But somehow I didn't get around to talking about Edgar Allan Poe, the most important horror writer who ever lived, probably. And this is my edition of the annotated Poe. So you can get all kinds of editions of Edgar Allan Poe, and most of them are going to be pretty good. You don't have to get the complete Edgar Allan Poe, although why wouldn't you? But you don't have to do that. Every classics publisher, Penguin, Oxford, Bantam, everybody does an Edgar Allan Poe volume, and they're all pretty good. This has all of the horror stories you would expect to be in an Edgar Allan Poe volume, only it's annotated, and it's beautiful. And this came out when? 2018? I want to say? 2015, it looks like. So this came out in 2015. I bought it right away. It's not by Klinger, actually. It's edited by Kevin J. Hayes. It's certainly just as beautiful as the other annotated volumes, the ones from Klinger. A lot of notes on these stories. Has all of these beautiful original illustrations. Edgar Allan Poe is a good author to have an annotated edition. for, because, you know, he lived a long time ago. It also has RoboCop. RoboCop makes an appearance. You know, you can never have too much RoboCop. That must be for the man who was used up, right? Yeah, the man who was used up. They have a picture of RoboCop. You just never know when RoboCop's going to show up. But yeah, this volume has all kinds of cool stuff. It's good to have the annotations because these stories were written so long ago that a lot of the references you might not know. You might not know the things that were going on at the time these stories were written. So an annotated volume is wonderful. I have another annotated Poe, but it's an older one, and it's probably locked away back there in the vault somewhere. But yeah, this is a great volume. It came out in 2015, so it's 10 years old. I'm assuming it's still available, but that's just an assumption. I don't know for sure. But it's so incredibly beautiful that if you do see it, pick it up. It looks really good. And I might actually read this during Horror Mayhem. It sort of depends. So, what else do I have to talk about? I have a question. And maybe somebody can answer this question. I picked up this book, and this is a fantasy book. I picked up this book from the back. This is Stephen Donaldson, The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. There were 3 trilogies. Apparently, this is the first trilogy. I have the first 2 trilogies in these big omnibus volumes, which aren't nice like the Michael Whalen covers from the old paperbacks, but, you know, it's what I got. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I haven't read this, but this book is a book I've heard more conflicting things about than any other book I've ever considered reading. There are people that say this is a piece of crap. They say it's terrible. And there are other people that say this is a work of genius. It's a classic. You have to read it. I hear so many conflicting things about this book. And it's not short. So before I commit to reading it, I have a question. So I have heard that the main character, Thomas Covenant, is kind of a scumbag. And he's thoroughly unlikable. And he does terrible things. And so you have a very long book with a very unlikable protagonist. And I'm wondering if that's the reason that people hate it. Is that the reason people say this sucks? Or is it just a poorly written book? Is it just a bad book? Because other people say this is magnificent and this is great. And so I pretty much have to read it. But I am curious about that point. I'm curious if the reason so many people say this book is not good is because of Thomas Covenant and him being a scumbag. I don't mind reading a book about a terrible person as long as it's a good book. And so that's my question. You know, is it a good book other than the fact that the main character is trash and a terrible guy? Or does the book itself just suck? I have a hard time believing it's that bad since there are 3 trilogies and it has a huge fan base. Well, I don't know if it's huge anymore, but it was pretty popular for a while. But yeah, it leaves me scratching my head. You know, is this something I should read or is it something I should not read? I'll leave it up to you. You guys know. You know this stuff. One more thing and I'll shut up. So I always have to talk about something comic book related. I always have to talk about something Robert E. Howard related. And so today, for the comic book portion of Roger's Random Book Show, let's talk about both. This is Almuric, which is Robert E. Howard's interplanetary science fiction novel based very much along the lines of Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars. This is the comic book adaptation of that novel, that novel, by the way, is the very first novel I ever read. Actually, it's the very first anything I ever read written by Robert E. Howard. I was familiar with Conan the comic book, but the first thing I've ever read that was actually written by Howard was Almuric, and I loved it. So this comic book version is really interesting. So Roy Thomas, the great Roy Thomas, who wrote the first 100-something issues of Conan the Barbarian and Savage Sword of Conan, and he's written every comic book character. One of the greatest comic book writers of all time. He did the adaptation. He wrote the script. But Tom Conrad did the artwork. And Tom Conrad we had seen here and there in Savage Sword of Conan. This story was serialized in Epic Illustrated, which was a kind of fantasy science fiction magazine that Marvel Comics did for a while in the 80s, which was really good. It was kind of a PG version of heavy metal. Very PG compared to heavy metal, but it was still, you know, for adult readers. But this is the comic book adaptation of Almuric, and it's really interesting. It was reprinted in a couple ways. It was reprinted as a limited series later on, and of course in this graphic novel, which is very beat up because, of course, I've read the hell out of this book. I really like this adaptation of Almuric. Tim Conrad is an artist I like. He is very strange. So this is the beginning of the story when our hero Ironhand, before he is transported to the planet of Almuric, he is framed for murder, and he has to go to his scientist friend. And his scientist friend has a way to transport him to another planet that this friend has discovered. He's come up with a transporter beam, basically. So he transports him, the man who shall become Ironhand, to the planet Almuric, and it's just awesome. So this is when he arrives on his new home, the planet of Almuric, and he is really, really strong for a guy from Earth, but now he's on a very savage planet, which is, you know, full of monsters and men that are practically monsters. And it's really, really good. And we have a ton of action. The art is very stylized. If you don't like Tim Conrad's art, you will not like this. But I think it's just magnificent. I think it's beautiful. I just love it. It's not a perfect adaptation. There's some stuff that happens in the beginning of the story that's cut out just for space. That there's a part of the story in the beginning where, you know, our hero Ironhand is roaming the countryside, fighting monsters and things, but that part was cut out. Ironhand! Just for space, but it has pretty much all of the other important plot elements from the novel in this graphic novel, and it's just awesome. It's just awesome. I don't have any of those original Epic Illustrateds. I used to, but it's been a while since I had any of those original issues. I don't know why I gave them up. Look at that. That's awesome. This comic book, this graphic novel is just amazing. I would do an Epic Comic Book Wednesday on this, but Steve, my partner on that show, hates this. He thinks it sucks. So it would just be depressing to do it. But it's awesome. It's awesome. I think it's magnificent. So yeah. It's good stuff. So yeah, I had to show it, Almuric. Definitely something that if you ever find this lying around anywhere in any form that it's been published in, I would recommend you pick it up because it is just fabulous. Yeah, it's good stuff. So yeah, Almuric from Robert E. Howard, adapted by Roy Thomas. He did a very good job in the adaptation. Illustrated by Tim Conrad in his own very interesting style, which I think is great. Yeah, so Almuric. That finishes up this thrilling episode of Roger's Random Book Show. I will catch you next time.